Morning. We're going to give it a few seconds here, let everybody in. I hope everyone is having a great Thursday. We were just talking about how it feels like a different day of the week because of the holiday. So I have to keep reminding myself it's Thursday. Looks like we still have some people coming in, so we'll just give it a second here. All right, we are going to go ahead and get started. Good morning. My name is Kristen Glass. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer here at the Quad Cities Chamber. It's my pleasure to be the host today for our business briefs grants, not just for nonprofits anymore. It's featuring Wastyn and Associates. Business briefs connect busy business leaders like you to latest guidance and resources around advocacy, financial resources, business intelligence, and promotions to grow your business. You can look for business briefs on our website and in our e-news. The content will always be available to you to refer again and again. If you have any questions throughout this business briefs, please place them in the Q&A box and we'll monitor that and get to as many as possible during the program. I'd like to go ahead and get us started, get to the content of today's program. I want to introduce our panelists. I have had the pleasure to work with many of our panelists today as the Quad Cities Chamber has benefited from the work of Wastyn and Associates and been able to expand our access to grant opportunities that we previously were not aware of. So I can attest to this business brief as being very beneficial. Linda Wastyn is our first panelist. She's the president of Wastyn and Associates. Linda has nearly 35 years of grant writing and fundraising experience that began at the University of Pittsburgh School of Medicine and continued at Bridgewater College in Virginia and St. Ambrose University. She opened Wastyn & Associates in August of 2011 to provide grant development, fundraising consultation, strategic planning facilitation, and board development to nonprofit and for-profit companies in the Quad Cities and around the country. Since founding, Wastyn & Associates has worked with more than 140 organizations, raising more than $10 million and helping countless other chart their future direction. Lynn McLaughlin is a senior consultant for research services at Wastyn & Associates. Lynn specializes in grant research, internet-based research, and library research for large nonprofit organizations, small volunteer organizations, and for-profit enterprises. And then we're also lucky to be joined by Cody Lanning from Mobo Trex. He'll provide a brief overview of how their company has benefited from grants to generate revenue. So without further ado, we're going to jump right into the program. And again, put your questions in the Q&A box if you have them, and we'll get to them at the end. Thank you to our panelists, and let's get started.
Great. Thank you so much, Kristen, for that great introduction. And we're excited to work with the Chamber to help your organization make its ideas happen. So we're going to just kind of give you a brief overview today of the kinds of funding and grant opportunities that are available both to nonprofit organizations, but also to for-profit organizations, including those who work with organizations who can benefit from grant funding. And as Kristen mentioned, Cody's going to provide a little bit of a case study of how Mobo Trex is using grant funding, and we'll also provide another one for you. But just as an overview, the federal government in general spends about $500 billion annually in money that goes to individuals, companies, nonprofit organizations through grants and other mechanisms. Now, the new budget that Biden has proposed actually increases that number. And if you've been paying attention to things like the infrastructure bill and the Family First bill that are currently going through Congress, those will increase those as well. So depending upon the outcome of that funding, that number could increase substantially in the next couple of years. So now is a great time, if you're not already looking at government funding, to be looking at that as a potential revenue source. In addition, private funders, foundations, corporations also provide about $100 billion annually in funding to organizations. And that is funding that can be available to you, to your customers, et cetera. As the stock market increases, that number will likely increase as well, because foundations give away about 5% of their assets, and most of those assets are invested in the stock market. So we're talking about grants, but there's actually 3 different ways that you can access these funds. And we're going to focus on grants mostly, but I want to touch on the other opportunities as well. First of all, there's grants, as we've been talking about, and a grant is a contract that you make between you and the funding source for a particular project. The funding source is very hands-off. They will put out what's called either a notice of funding opportunity, a request for proposal, a request for application that says, hey, we've got money and we want to boost up the infrastructure in our community. Who's got an idea? Put a project forward. And then once you get the money, they're pretty hands-off. A contract is money for doing business with the government itself. And so there's a lot of money out in government contracting if you provide services to government entities. And we're going to touch on those briefly, but that's another avenue for funding as well. And then there's cooperative agreements, which are agreements where you, the recipient, and the funder work very closely hand in hand for a particular project. So a cooperative agreement might be looking at, how can we study a particular project, or we're looking for someone to help us do something within the government, and they become very involved in those things as well. So who qualifies for grant funding? Most people think about nonprofit organizations, generally 501c3s, as organizations that qualify for grant funding, and certainly they do. But in addition, government organizations qualify, educational institutions, public housing authorities, for-profit organizations do qualify for some grant funding directly, as do small businesses. But really, if you sell to or have as your customers nonprofit organizations, government organizations, educational institutions, public housing, healthcare organizations, these types who qualify for grant funding, it can be in your interest to educate them about the possible funding avenues that they have and help them to secure those funds for the products that you might sell them. So what are some of the types of projects that are funded? Construction. Oftentimes you can find funding for any kind of construction project. Lots of money for education. The Biden proposed budget puts a ton of money into education programs. So if you work with educational institutions, that might be an opportunity for you. There's more money going into the environment, especially for climate change. If you do things with alternative energy sources, with new types of technology, especially those that you can demonstrate would have a positive impact on slowing climate change, there's likely a lot of money out there as well. Health, the second largest increase that the Biden administration is proposing is going into health and human services. A lot of money for mental health, a lot of money for disease prevention, not surprisingly, and a lot of money to help eliminate some of the social determinants of health, or to try and make healthcare a little more equitable across the board. So if you work in health, that's another big area. And then technology, telecommunications, transportation, the infrastructure bill, which is transportation plus, a lot of different ways that they're defining infrastructure. If assuming that passes, there's going to be a lot of money released in that area as well. And in fact, they've already started to release that. We've already started to see some more transportation funding coming on board. So how can you find those grant funds? I'm going to turn it over to Lynn, who is our researcher extraordinaire, who will provide some more information about how you can find who might fund your organization or your clients.
Thanks, Linda. So the one go-to spot that you really want to use, it pulls it all together, is grants.gov. So that takes all those federal grants and pulls it to one website, which is easily used, and also you can search on it using keywords by the various departments, Department of Transportation, Health and Human Services. You can also sign up for email alerts. So if I've got a client, for instance, Mobo Trex, we're working for transportation for them, I put those search parameters in and they push those emails to me once funding becomes available. And it can be funding that's available immediately or funding that's forecasted. And we like when it's forecasted because sometimes when that funding is available immediately, those grants are due fairly quickly. And with federal grants, those can be difficult to write fairly quickly. So especially with those forecasted ones, we really want to look at those and plan out on our calendar. This looks like it's going to be released. Let's get ready and let's go ahead and submit that opportunity. For your private funders is Foundation Directory. And Foundation Directory is a pay service. It is a little pricey, but the Rock Island Library and the Davenport Library both have access to it. So you can go there and use it, but that pulls all of your private funders together. Now, up until recently, the federal government has also used Foundation Directory to pull some of their grants into Foundation Directory. I don't like that as much. It still doesn't have a comprehensive list of all the federal governments. So those are the two areas that you want to look at. Also, newsletters. Newsletters are huge of what's being, like Linda said, forecasted, what's coming down the pike. Those are all things that we put on our calendar to start to look for when those opportunities are going to be released.
And I want to add, Lynn mentioned that Foundation Center Directory is a paid service. Grants.gov is free.
Yes.
And so that's something that you don't have to pay for. You can just go in and look through it. Foundation Search also has a monthly subscription rate. It's more expensive. So if the price is something that's cost prohibitive for you, library, but also subscribe for a month, do a whole bunch of grant searching, and then cancel it if that's what you need to do. The other thing I found really useful with federal grants is to get to know the agencies. So if you're looking at transportation, get to know the Department of Transportation. They've got a phenomenal website. They'll tell you what funding has, is out, is coming out, has been released in the past. They've got newsletters. You can sign up for those email pushes, as Lynn mentioned, through grants.gov, but you can also do them through the individual organizations. State grants as well. Get to know the state website, whether it's Iowa, Illinois, or both, and look at where is that funding coming from in the state. When I was at St. Ambrose, I got to know the Department of Education websites very well, especially for Iowa, but that's another really good place to be looking as well. Contracts are a little bit different. The best way to find contracts is to sign up for alerts from some of the contracting organizations. And we put a list of them here for you, for the local cities, the states, at least the larger ones around here. I want to highlight Iowa State University Center for Industrial Research and Service because they will provide you with assistance to set up these alerts. There is a larger database that you can subscribe to that will bring you these funding alerts, these contracts from around the country, and they can help you with that. And at least when I last worked with them, that was also a free service as well. So that's another place to look into. So once you find a grant source, how do you know if it's a good one? Lynn, you want to talk us through this piece?
Exactly. So this is no good unless the the grant source actually fits what you're looking for, what type of organization you are, and the project you're looking at. So when you pull those federal government grants, it'll say who they fund and the eligibility. So for instance, if you're a nonprofit, if you're a higher ed, if you're a municipality, a state, county government, those will tell you right away whether you're going to fit in that pot of money or not. Also, do they provide enough money for the project that you're looking at? If it's a low dollar and it's in, again, the federal grants are very time consuming. It may not be worth the time if the project total money is not there for you. And do they want larger projects? Again, you've got to make sure that your project is going to fit exactly what they're looking for, especially with the federal government grants. It is spelled out very explicitly exactly what they're looking for.
And sometimes they'll have not just a ceiling, but a floor. So
Right.
if they say these grants are 100,000 and above and your project is 20,000, they're going to reject it offhand because they want something with greater impact. Throw some more projects in there, add some more partners, or some ways that you might get a larger project.
Mm-hmm. The all important deadlines. Do I have enough time? And Lynn can really speak to this, and she's written quite a few federal grants, but sometimes you will find that perfect federal grant and it will fit, but that deadline is just so tight. So again, if the forecasting area for that is just huge, I really enjoy using that because then I can plan out, hopefully once that RFP gets released, we can go. And also, will the funding come in time? Is the project that we need, and when we need those dollars, is this going to be at the time that we need it?
And just to talk about how much time it takes to write a federal grant, I usually, and they're different ones are different, but I usually figure on about 100 hours to write a federal grant. And that doesn't assume that you've already done a whole lot of thinking ahead of time. If you've got to do the thinking and then the writing, it can be even more. So looking at what's coming up, the forecasting, as Lynn said, is critically important.
And again, is this project a priority for them? Sometimes I can find those grant opportunities that it might fit. We might be able to massage it and make it get in there, but is that really what we want to do? And again, with the time consume of writing it and having it just rejected. So again, it's very important that you've met all the eligibility and exactly what they're looking for in the description. And all important, especially with private funders, is call or visit the funder, especially when you're approaching a funder who doesn't know your organization, who is not familiar with it, and you'd like to approach them for a funding opportunity. It's pick up the phone, introduce yourself, introduce your organization, what you do, and see if you can sit down and have a chat with them, or just simply, like I said, just over the phone.
And that's also the case with government funders. They've got program officers whose job it is to give away this money. And if they don't give it away, they don't get it appropriated in the next year. So that's their job, to help you find the funding sources that you need, which I think would be a really cool job. But so make sure you pick up the phone, you call them, you talk to them about the project, and then the backside, make sure you listen to what they have to say, because they will give you some really good hints. So what are some of the next steps? If you're thinking, gee, this sounds really good, I'd like to get into looking at grant funding for my organization, what are some things that you might think about doing next? First of all, you want to identify what kinds of projects or products do you offer where there might be potential grant funding. What are some of the priorities on the federal level? What are some of the priorities on the state level? What are some of the things that private funders are looking at? Certainly health is one of them. Infrastructure's become a higher priority. Mental health, education, alternative energy sources, diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. That's just a small sample of the kinds of things that can get funded. I rarely have someone who comes to me and says, hey, do you think we can find funding for XYZ? And the answer is no. Almost anything you can probably find grant funding for. Second of all, you want to look at who are your clients who might be eligible to receive some kind of grant funding, and start reaching out to them to talk about getting grant funding. I got a phone call one time from an architect who was working with a client who wanted to build a new building, and they didn't have the money and didn't know how to find the money. So they found me and said, hey, can you work with this client and help them? So if you can make that connection and help them find the funding, then they're much more likely to then spend it working with you. You want to find funding sources for eligible clients and projects, and link the two together is even better to do. Communicate funding options to your clients. Make sure that's part of your sales strategy, part of the discussions that you have with them. And Cody will talk about that again in a minute. And think beyond just identification of grant funding to how can you potentially help them write the application. As I said, a federal grant can take 100 hours or more. They're incredibly technical, incredibly time consuming. Foundation funding can take significantly less time, but for some of the organizations you're working with, they may not have the resources to do that. So are there ways that you might be able to link them to these kinds of resources? So Cody, you want to talk a little bit about how Mobo Trex is looking at grant funding?
Sure. Thank you, Linda. So I'm Cody Lanning. I'm the sales and marketing coordinator at Mobo Trex. It's a company that's headquartered here in Davenport, Iowa. And Mobo Trex manufactures traffic control equipment, including traffic signals, pedestrian signals, cabinets, detection systems, basically any type of equipment you find at an intersection, we can provide. And so we work with a lot of government agencies and municipalities and local and state DOTs. And over the past year, we've been hearing a lot about budget constraints due to a variety of factors, but we found out that grant funding could be a solution to offset some of these concerns. We also discovered that many of our products fit into these transportation grants that are out there. And there was a whole lot of money out there that we didn't know about or had never pursued as a company. And so currently our sales team is presenting these grant funding opportunities to our customers. And we've been trying to build awareness to our customers just about how much money is out there for the agencies. And some of them do not have the time to search for these grant opportunities or have a grant writer on staff. And so we're trying to help them that there are other resources that we can help them with. And now we've kind of discovered agencies are realizing that even if they have budget constraints or don't have a grant writer, they can still apply for these grants and receive money to improve their roads and intersections. And so the research has been very helpful. Our customers have been very receptive as well. So, I'd like to thank Linda and Lynn for kind of introducing us to all of this grant money that's out there that we can use. So thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Cody. And that becomes a value add to your customers when you're providing them not only with your product, but also with your information. Mm-hmm. Another company I want to just mention is Polycom, which is a telecommunications company. And I worked with them about 10 years ago when our company first opened. They sell a lot to healthcare organizations and educational institutions, at least they did 10 years ago. And what they would do is they actually hired grant writers who would assist their clients. So that was one of the things that I did was they would hire me and say, hey, will you work with customer X and write this grant for them? Which is another avenue that you can take, another strategy. And then they also provided product specific guidance when it came down to what are you going to do and how is this beneficial? What better than to get it from the proverbial horse's mouth and find out directly from the company how that can work. I worked with another client who was working with a company and they were offering to review the application, especially the technical specifications to make sure everything was explained correctly. That can be another kind of service that you can provide to your customers as well. So that was a really quick overview of where some of that money is out there from predominantly the federal government, but there's also some money in private funders, which we touched on briefly. And actually, we've got more information on our website. We've got a special website page set up, wastynassociates.com/chamber, that will have this on it and some other resources that tie to this presentation, if you want to look there as well. But with that, I will turn it over to Kristen to see what questions we have.
Well, thank you, Linda, Lynn, and Cody. This is very helpful information. And again, we've experienced this ourselves and been able to diversify our funding sources. So great work. And now we'll see if any of the participants have any questions for the team. And again, you can place those right in the chat box if you do. Yeah. Do you do consultations to help find grants? This comes from David.
Yes, we do. We can help with any of the grant seeking process. We will be happy to have a conversation with you to learn more about what are you doing and to kind of brainstorm where might that funding be. Who are your clients? Might there be grant funding available to you? And then Lynn can find needles in haystacks, and she is our researcher, and she will then take that information and help you find grants that might fit your priorities.
Mhm.
Then from there, we can help you write them as well.
Mhm.
So Lynn and Linda, do you have to use both services, or could you do just the research side and then write it yourself?
Yes.
Good. Okay.
Yes. You can also find it yourself and bring it to us to write. So
Perfect.
we can do any part of that entire process. We've also worked with some clients where they do the writing, we'll do the editing and the project management. I'm working with a higher ed client right now where I'm kind of managing the grant project and helping edit and get the final product together.
Great. Another question from Teresa. Lynn, having been on boards for nonprofits, what type of money should we seek a writer for grants?
In other words, how much should you give the writer to write their grant? Is that what you're asking?
Teresa, if you can clarify that, but the question says, what type of money should we seek a writer for grants?
Oh, so, or in other words, what the level of the gift you're asking for is when you should maybe seek a grant writer then? Well, okay.
Yes, so let's answer that question, and then Teresa, if you have another question.
Okay, I'll let Linda.
Yeah, Linda, at what point is there a certain dollar amount that you should be a threshold?
Yeah, it really depends on what your organization's capacity. Certainly there's a return on investment if you're hiring someone, especially someone external, to write a grant for you. So that becomes an internal question. But the other question is, what is your capacity? If you don't have anyone internal who can write grants for your organization and you want to seek grant funding, you've got to find someone who can do that. Whether it's a volunteer, whether it's a staff person, whether it's outsourcing, it takes a particular talent to be a good grant writer. And certainly you have to write, you have to think, you have to know how to make arguments, and it takes time. So the question I always ask first is, do you have someone in your organization who has the time and the talent to be writing those applications? If not, is there a volunteer, a board member who can do that? Or if not, then start looking external. I don't know that there's any particular dollar amount that says this is what we need to go externally, other than is it a smart return on your investment?
And Linda, is it fair to say based on the grant, the time that it takes, the pricing structure changes based on the time commitment that it takes? So it's not all kind of a one price or one fee item.
And that's a good question. And it is all based on the time up front. It's against the grant Professionals Association Code of Ethics to be paid a percentage or to get a bonus based upon whether or not it's funded. It is all based on what's the time involved to put that application together. So a federal grant that takes 100 hours is obviously going to cost a whole lot more than a grant to the Regional Development Authority that's only going to take a few hours.
Yep. Teresa, I hope that answered your question. We are at 9:30. You see on the screen, you have the team's contact information for both Linda and Lynn. If you have any questions, you can also give them a call or look right on wastynassociates.com/chamber. Thank you again to Linda, Lynn, and Cody for doing today's business briefs. Very helpful information. This information will also be on our website at quadcitieschamber.com. We recorded today's session. You're also going to receive a very brief 1-minute survey after this business briefs. If you take a moment, this really helps us better serve you, and you'll be entered to win a gift card if you take the survey. So thank you again for the team, for putting this on, and please reach out if you have any questions. I'm sure Linda and Lynn will be happy to help. That concludes today's business briefs. Thank you everyone for participating, and watch for more business briefs to come in the future. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.